You're here at Grand Adventures, and today we're chasing the real story behind Frankenstein. Yes, the lightning, the laboratory, the stitched-together myth that basically invented modern sci-fi horror. If you've ever wondered where that monster actually came from, why a teenage girl dreamed him up on a stormy night in Switzerland, and what real experiments with electricity on human bodies looked like, buckle in. This one moves from castle ruins in Germany to anatomy theaters in London, from the shadow of Mont Blanc to an Edinburgh backroom where the price of a human body could buy you dinner and a drink. Let's go. Mary Shelley was 18 when she wrote The Bones of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. Not a professor, not a lab-coated scientist, just a young woman traveling with a poet through a particularly cursed summer. The year was 1816, the year without a summer, when a volcano on the other side of the world coughed so much ash into the sky that Europe's weather went off the rails. Crops failed, skies stayed bruised. And on the shores of Lake Geneva, a group of friends rented a house called Villa Diodati and told each other ghost stories while lightning stitched across the clouds. That's the scene most people know. Byron, Shelley, Polidori, and Mary, trapped by rain, daring each other to write something that would haunt the world. But that night only lit the match. The tinder had been laid down years earlier in lecture halls, laboratories, and public executions by men who believed that electricity wasn't just a force in wires, but a spark that might be coaxed into dead muscle, a tick, a twitch, a breath, maybe even a soul. Start with frogs. It always starts that way in the textbooks. The Italian scientist Luigi Galvani hanging frog legs on iron hooks in the 1780s, noticing that when a brass scalpel touched them, the legs kicked. He called it animal electricity, and it scandalized people who thought of life as something immaterial. Hold that picture. Rain slanting against an old window, a scientist with tidy hair leaning over a dissecting table, and dead tissue twitching like it heard some music the living couldn't. Then comes Giovanni Aldini, Galvani's nephew, who had a stronger stomach and more flair. Aldini toured Europe performing demonstrations with whole animal carcasses, sending currents through them until they shuddered, eyes open and not seeing. He wasn't alone. Electricity shows were a thing. Half science, half theater. People would come to see sparks shower from Leyden jars, feel mild shocks run up their arms, watch gold leaf flutter. But nothing drew a crowd like the promise that death might not be final. The most infamous demonstration came in 1803 at Newgate Prison in London. A man named George Foster had been executed for murder. His body, still warm, was carried to a room where Aldini and the prison surgeons had prepared batteries and wires. They placed metal rods against different parts of Foster's body. The jaw worked, the chest heaved, an eye opened. When a current touched the facial nerve, the face grimaced violently, as if in pain. Someone in the audience fainted. A rumor flew, ridiculous but telling, that Foster might be shocked back to life if they just kept at it. Aldini wasn't a ghoul. He was pursuing a hypothesis. But you can feel the line wobble between experiment and spectacle, science and showmanship, curiosity and horror. These were the clippings Mary would have heard about. She and Percy Shelley were fascinated by chemistry and electricity, galvanism, as it was called. They knew the talk. What if the vital spark could be jump-started? What if the boundary between dead and alive wasn't a wall but a fog line? Now, let's walk into the geography of this myth, because that's where Grand Adventures lives. If you're ever near Darmstadt, Germany, look up at Frankenstein Castle piled on a hill. Locals will tell you that a 17th century alchemist named Johann Conrad Dippel was born there. Dippel, who experimented with oils, dyes, and possibly cadavers, depending on which rumor mill you subscribe to. Did Mary Shelley visit the castle? The travel records are debated. What we do know is that the name Frankenstein existed in her orbit, and Europe was buzzing with tales of mad scientists. The castle ruins add a Gothic silhouette to a story already bristling with lightning rods. Then there's the alpine spine of Switzerland, the Mer de Glace Glacier, the thunderheads snagged on Mont Blanc. Mary and Percy took a boat on Lake Geneva and visited Chamonix. In Frankenstein, Victor flees to the mountains pursued by his creation. Those cliffs are more than scenery. They're morality in stone. The glacier doesn't care if you're genius or monster. It stands, ancient and indifferent, while we tinker with forbidden things. Back in Britain, outside the pages of a novel, the real economy of anatomy was uglier than anything in Shelley's imagination. Medical schools needed bodies to study. The law allotted only a handful from executed criminals, which wasn't enough for the surgeons training to set bones and save lives. So a black market sprang up. Resurrectionists, they were called, men who dug up fresh graves at night, lugging corpses to anatomy schools for cash. They avoided stealing clothing, that could lead to a felony, and worked quick. Families fought back by lying on graves, installing iron cages called mort safes, or paying watchmen to guard cemeteries. Edinburgh gave that shadow economy its worst case in 1828, Burke and Hare. When even grave robbing couldn't keep pace with demand, they took a direct route and murdered people, often the poor and unmissed, to sell their bodies to a respected professor. The scandal helped push reforms through. The Anatomy Act of 1832 in the UK widened legal supply to stop the crimes committed in the name of education. It's a nasty truth nested right in the heart of the Frankenstein myth. Progress, even when it aims to heal, can grow in soil fertilized by exploitation. If you're feeling the ground tilt under your feet, good. Frankenstein is not a story about a cackling monster. It's a story about people with good intentions losing their way. Victor's sin isn't curiosity, it's arrogance, and then, worse, abandonment. He runs from the thing he made. He creates life, recoils from its ugliness, and fails to take responsibility. That failure has echoes in history. Take Andrew Ure in Glasgow, 1818. Another anatomy theater, another demonstration. Ure passed electric current through the body of an executed man, and witnesses claimed the corpse appeared to breathe, to clench fists, to grimace. It wasn't life, it was muscle responding to current. But to a crowd sitting elbow to elbow under gaslight, the effect would have been suffocatingly real. Imagine the rustle of coats, the whispering. Imagine that one person who couldn't sleep that night because they kept seeing the prisoner's jaw grind and thought, what if? Or look later, a century on, at Robert Cornish in California in the 1930s. Less gothic, more clinical. Cornish attempted resuscitation on freshly dead animals and, he hoped, humans, using a rocking contraption to get blood moving while injecting anticoagulants and stimulants. His proposals to test on executed prisoners sparked outrage. He got as far as reviving dogs briefly after induced death. It wasn't necromancy, but it poked the same bruise. How far is too far? What's the moral gravity of a miracle? When Mary finally wrote her book, she coupled scientific chatter with a human story. The creature isn't born evil. He learns language. He admires the warmth of a family he spies through a wall, his hand splayed on cold wood as he listens to their music. He only turns violent after being rejected again and again, a mirror held up to society's reflex to shove out whatever looks wrong. That moral is older than galvanism and twice as necessary now. Here's a travel map you can actually follow to feel the layers of it. Start at Lake Geneva. Stand on the pebbly shore on a day when the weather changes every 15 minutes. Sun, then bruise-colored sky, then a white sheet of rain sweeping across the water. Read Mary's 1831 introduction to Frankenstein, where she describes the nightmares and the waking dream that led her to imagine a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside his lifeless creation. You can almost pick out the villa through the trees, even though it's privately owned and hidden. Drive the loop through the Chamonix Valley and look at the glacier from below. It used to fill the valley. Now it's retreated a heartbreaking distance. The old stairways, once set beside the ice, hang in the air. Nature changes too, though not with our speed. Then, fly to London. Visit the Hunterian Museum, where the legacy of anatomical study is housed in jars and drawers. a reminder of both the beauty and the brutality baked into the history of medicine. Walk past Newgate Prison's old site. It's gone. A traffic knot and office towers have replaced it. And feel how heiress bury each other. If you've got time, hop to Edinburgh. Greyfriars Kirkyard feels like it remembers every midnight shovel. Look for mort safes, the iron cages still visible over a handful of plots. The city's museums tell Burke and Hare's story plainly, without cartooning it. By the time you finish, you'll be thinking about where knowledge comes from and who pays for it, and whether we're careful enough when we flip the switch labeled progress. Finally, if your road trip has a long leg to spare, head to Hesse in Germany and climb to Frankenstein Castle. The name alone snaps the whole latticework of ideas into focus. Noble families and laboratories, lightning and vanity, legends layered over lives. There's a festival there now. People dress as monsters and drink beer under floodlit walls. It's fun. That's not a crime. But step a little away from the music and put a hand on the stone. You'll feel how cold it keeps, even in summer. Here's the thing I love about the true Frankenstein story. It isn't scientists are bad. It isn't don't ask questions. It's a warning about half-finished responsibility. Victor wants to do something extraordinary. He isolates himself. He succeeds, and then he can't stand what he's made. The creature, desperate for kindness, is met with screams. The catastrophe that follows isn't the fault of a spark or a storm, but of a failure to care for the consequences of a breakthrough. Flip through a modern medical ethics textbook and you'll see the same questions, cleaned up in committees and consent forms. When we transplant a face, what does identity mean? If we can revive a heart that's stopped, how long do we try? If artificial intelligence writes a poem, who owns it? These aren't monsters shambling through alpine passes anymore. They're us, sleep-deprived at a lab bench at 3 a.m., or sitting in a hospital hallway under a bad painting of flowers, or coding through the night, promising that the app will fix loneliness. Frankenstein endures because it speaks to the hot part of the human brain that wants to build, and the colder part that looks away when the building goes wrong. Let's loop back to that 1816 storm for a close. Picture Villa Diodati again. The candles gutter. The lake is a big sheet of hammered tin under the lightning. Byron dares everyone to write a ghost story. Polidori begins the tale that will become The Vampire, a preview version of Dracula, a century early. Mary sleeps, wakes, and writes her own nightmare. In it, a student of science pieces together a form from parts scavenged in charnel houses and dissection rooms. He's not a count lapping blood from a goblet. He's a kid in a hoodie with a key to the lab after hours. He learns a secret. He forgets to be kind. Travelers who want the true Frankenstein often chase a single address. What room? What desk? What mountain turn? But the real trail lives in layered places and uncomfortable facts. Frog muscles twitching under a scalpel, a London crowd gasping as an executed man's jaw jerks, an Edinburgh grave guarded by iron, a German ruin that lends its name, a Swiss sky so electrically charged that a teenager feels like she can see ideas forming in it. We can't end without meeting the creature on his own terms. In the novel's last scenes, he speaks with more heartbreak than rage. He wanted a place in the world. Denied that, he made himself into the rumor everyone already believed. That's a social autopsy. It's also a warning for every era that invents a new kind of person, through surgery, technology, migration, or just imagination, and then refuses to make room for them. So here's my pitch for the most honest pilgrimage you can take if you're a Frankenstein fan. Start at a science museum. Any good one will do. Stand by the interactive exhibits where kids light bulbs with a crank or charge their hair with static. Watch the delight. Remember that human light. Then, carve an hour to visit a medical history museum or an old cemetery. Read the plaques about the men and women who taught themselves the human body because they wanted to heal it, and the families who fought to protect their dead from being carried off. Walk quietly. Realize both sides were guarding something sacred. Then, if you're lucky enough to be near mountains, End your day where the air thins and the sky gets big. The best thinking happens where you can see weather coming. Mary Shelley's storm is over. The ash cleared. Crops grew again. The villa changed owners. The castle went quiet. The anatomy theaters turned into amphitheaters with accreditation committees and IRBS and informed consent. But we still live with her question. What are we responsible for when we make something new? Not just in a lab, on a channel, on a page, in a garage, in a startup, in a basement studio at midnight when a brilliant idea starts to look like a person. Grand Adventures isn't a horror channel. It's a history road trip with a seat for legends. The legend of Frankenstein is more than lightning and a stitched forehead. It's a European map layered with scientific bravado and human cost. It's an 18-year-old who listened to storms and heard a future calling to be handled with care. And it's us, listeners and travelers, deciding what to do with the power in our hands. This week, this year, in this weird century that Mary helped imagine. If you go to Lake Geneva, watch the water blush with evening and tell me you don't feel it. If you climb the Frankenstein hill, look for bats threading the twilight between black stone teeth. If you walk Edinburgh's kirkyards at dusk and see iron bars over a grave, let the truth sink in. People will do anything to protect the people they love, even after the bell stops ringing. That's the heart of it. Not the monster. The love. And maybe that's the truest reading of Frankenstein. Not a warning that science is wicked, but a demand that our brightest work be shepherded with tenderness. Electricity is neutral. So are scalpels and software and sleepless ideas. It's the hands that matter and the heart behind them. Victor forgot that. Mary did not. Thank you for riding along on this one. If you loved it, there are a dozen more places this story branches. The hospitals that turned a brutal trade into an ethical science, the Italian labs where frog legs first danced, the German castle whose name we borrowed for a myth, the glaciers that keep their own counsel while we argue at their feet. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and which stop on the Frankenstein trail you'd pick first. Next week, we're chasing another piece of history that grew teeth. Bring a jacket. The weather out there has a way of getting dramatic right when the good parts begin.